A millionaire throws his paralyzed daughter off a bridge to die. A poor little fisherman saves her. Then the unexpected happens. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments below. Whether it's a warm porch or the comfort of your living room, we'd love to hear from you as we begin this incredible journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Fisher King was just a boy of 9 years old, but in his small world, the riverside village was all he had ever known. Life was simple here, tucked away beneath towering trees and a sky that stretched endlessly, like a page waiting to be written. The sound of the river flowing was a constant companion, its gurgling whispers almost like a lullaby that soothed his spirit. His home was modest, a weathered wooden cabin perched on the edge of the riverbank. He lived there with his grandmother, a kind woman whose frailty only made Fisher more protective. They had everything they needed, in a way that made them rich in spirit even if not in wealth. The cabin smelled of fresh fish and the earthy scent of the river. Fisher woke up early every morning to help his grandmother with chores. His hands were small but steady, accustomed to the motion of mending nets and sorting out the day's catch. But life, as he would soon learn, has a way of throwing sudden and violent storms, ones that leave a boy no choice but to confront forces beyond his comprehension. It was an ordinary afternoon when everything changed. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the river's surface. Fisher was out by the dock, his small fishing rod in hand, when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of shouting. It was distant at first, but as the wind carried it closer, he could make out the voice. A man's voice, angry, frantic. It came from the direction of the old bridge, a place Fisher rarely went, as it was not a part of his world. The bridge was old, a relic of a time long forgotten, and stories of strange happenings there were whispered among the village elders. Curiosity tugged at him, and Fisher put down his rod, walking quietly toward the bridge. He kept close to the edge of the trees, moving silently so as not to be seen. As he neared, the shouting grew louder, more desperate, and then, through the branches, he saw it. A man, a giant of a man. He stood tall, towering over a figure kneeling. At the edge of the bridge, a woman. Fisher couldn't see her face, but he could tell she was in pain. The man was yelling at her, words Fisher couldn't fully make out. His voice was thick, like syrup, as if every word carried the weight of years of anger. And then, just as Fisher took a step closer, it happened. The man shoved the woman hard. She tumbled over the edge of the bridge, her body crashing against the cold steel rails as she fell. Fisher gasped, his heart in his throat. It happened so fast, too fast for him to process. He couldn't move, couldn't think, just stood there frozen as her body plunged toward the dark water below. Without thinking, Fisher sprinted to the edge of the bridge. He didn't know how he had the courage, but something inside him told him to act. Without even checking if anyone had noticed him, he dove into the river, feet first, the shock of the cold water hitting him like a punch to the chest. He swam frantically, the current pulling at him with unforgiving force. He saw her. She was floating, barely conscious, her body limp and heavy in the water. "Hold on!" Fisher screamed, reaching for her with every ounce of strength he had. He dragged her toward the shore, struggling to keep her afloat. The effort was exhausting, but Fisher didn't stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he pulled her to the riverbank. Both of them collapsed on the wet ground. Gasping for breath, Fisher looked at the woman's face. Her eyes were closed, her pale skin nearly blending into the pale blue of the evening sky. She was breathing, though shallow, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Fisher felt the tension in his chest release. He had saved her. He had saved a life. But that was when he heard it. The voice. The same voice that had been shouting before. "You!" The man's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Fisher looked up, heart pounding. The man was standing on the bridge, looking down at them, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "What are you doing?" "She's mine. She's mine to do with as I please." Fisher froze. He had no idea who this man was or what he wanted with the woman, but the sheer fury in his voice sent a chill down his spine. "What do you think you're doing?" the man growled, taking a step toward Fisher, his eyes narrowed with menace. "Stay out of it, boy. This doesn't concern you." But Fisher wasn't listening anymore. His thoughts were spinning too fast. He needed to protect her. He couldn't let this man get to her. He didn't know who she was, but the connection between them was unexplainable, as if fate had brought them together in that very moment. With every ounce of his willpower, Fisher stood up, his legs shaking, and he dragged the woman further up the riverbank, away from the bridge. The man, enraged, started running down the slope toward them. But Fisher was determined. He had no idea what he was going to do next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this man get to her. His heart raced. The man was closing in. Fisher turned to face the woman, whispering softly, "Stay with me. Just stay with me." And then the impossible happened. The woman's eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking onto his. She didn't speak, but her hand moved toward his, gripping it with surprising strength. In that moment, Fisher realized something he hadn't known before. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her and whatever dark, terrifying past had brought her to this point. And as the man approached, Fisher knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. Fisher's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he tugged at the woman's hand, pulling her farther from the riverbank, toward the dense trees. His small body ached, his muscles protesting the strain, but the adrenaline pulsed through him like fire. Every step he took was another step toward something he couldn't quite understand, something bigger than him. The man's voice, louder, now echoed across the silent river, each word seething with rage. "You think you can just take her from me?" His steps thundered, fast approaching. Fisher's heart pounded. His grandmother had always told him to never run from trouble, but this was different. This wasn't trouble, it was terror. And he wasn't sure if he had the strength to face it. The woman, still barely conscious, stirred in his grasp. Her fingers trembled against his, but she squeezed his hand once, just once. It was enough to make him stop and look at her, her eyes flickering open with a haunted look, the kind of look that told a story of pain, desperation, and a past far too dark to bring into the light. Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of the man's footsteps. Fisher hesitated, unsure of how to answer. What could he say? That he didn't really know? That something inside him had just felt right when he saw her fall? He shook his head, a soft smile pulling at the corner of his lips. "I couldn't just let you drown." The woman didn't respond. She just nodded, her eyes flicking toward the man now standing at the edge of the trees. The shadow of his enormous figure loomed, blocking out the last rays of sunlight as he approached. Fisher could see the man clearly now, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive clothes that seemed far too clean for someone who would be on a bridge like this. His dark hair was neatly combed back, his jaw sharp and hard. There was a dangerous gleam in his eyes, as though he were ready to devour anything that got in his way. "You're making a mistake, kid," the man growled, his voice so low it sent a shiver down Fisher's spine. "She belongs to me. I paid for her." Fisher's stomach twisted. Paid for her? What did that mean? Who was she? And why was this man so determined to take her back? Fisher had so many questions, but no answers. The woman stirred again, her breathing shallow but growing, steadier. She was alive. That's what mattered most. Fisher glanced up at her, finding her eyes focused on the man. Calm, resigned, yet there was something else there. A flicker of defiance. The man smirked, his eyes narrowing as he took another step forward. "This is your last chance, kid. Let her go or I'll make sure you regret it." Fisher felt a surge of fear course through him, but it was quickly replaced with a sense of something stronger, defiance. He couldn't let this man take her. He couldn't. "I'm not letting her go," Fisher said, his voice steady even as his heart raced. He wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but it was the only choice he had. The man's lips curled into a smile, but it was far from friendly. It was the kind of smile that said he'd played this game before, and he always won. Fisher's thoughts raced. He had to get the woman out of here. He couldn't fight the man, not like this, not with his small hands and his young body. But there was something else, a whisper, a tug in the back of his mind. A place. The old barn by the edge of the forest. It was isolated, hidden from the town. No one would find them there. Without a word, Fisher tugged at the woman's hand, pulling her away from the man's gaze. "Come on," he whispered urgently. "We have to go." She didn't resist. In fact, she followed him willingly, though her steps were slow and unsure. The man yelled after them, but it was no use. Fisher's heart was pounding as he led the woman through the trees, heading straight for the old barn. The barn was as weathered as the rest of the village, its roof sagging slightly, the wooden beams creaking in protest with every gust of wind. It was quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of silence that felt like it was hiding something dangerous. Fisher led the woman inside, his hand still clutching hers as if he could somehow shield her from whatever was chasing them. The barn smelled of hay, wood, and the faint, earthy scent of animals that hadn't been there in years. It was empty, save for the remnants of old farming tools and bits of hay scattered across the floor. He looked back at her, noticing how pale she still was. She needed help. She needed more than he could give her. "Are you okay?" Fisher asked, his voice soft. The woman nodded, though she didn't speak right away. Her gaze shifted to the floor, a faraway look in her eyes. "I've been running for so long. I didn't think anyone would care enough to stop him." "Who is he?" Fisher asked, his voice quieter now. He needed answers. There was something more to this story, something bigger than just the angry man on the bridge. The woman hesitated, her fingers tightening around his. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "He's a monster, a millionaire. He's been using people like me for years." Fisher frowned. "But why?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Because he can. Because he thinks he owns us. I thought I was free, but I never really was." Fisher didn't fully understand, but he didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes. The pain, the years of suffering that no child should ever have to bear. He had just saved her from the water, but what she had been through, that was a battle for another time. "We'll figure it out," Fisher said, a surprising sense of determination in his voice. "But first, you need to rest. Just rest." The woman didn't respond, but she closed her eyes, her body leaning against the wall of the barn, her breath slowing. And for the first time since he had pulled her from the river, Fisher felt the weight of what he had done. He hadn't just saved a stranger. He had stepped into a world of darkness, a world that had already marked this woman for destruction. The silence in the barn was suffocating, but Fisher stayed close, determined not to let her down. Not now, but somewhere in the back of his mind. The question lingered. What kind of man would throw someone like her off a bridge and leave them to die? And the answer was closer than he realized. The barn smelled of damp wood and the scent of rusted tools, mingled with the faint trace of hay that had long since lost its golden hue. Fisher sat beside the woman, his small frame pressed against the cool, rough wooden beams. His mind raced, trying to understand what had just happened. But the shock of it all, of the woman's fall, her rescue, and the mysterious man's fury, still held him in a tight grip. He glanced at her again, noting how she seemed to shrink further into herself, her shoulders sagging, her hands trembling. The darkening shadows inside the barn stretched across the floor, but the silence between them felt heavier than the night itself. The woman had fallen asleep, or passed out, Fisher couldn't quite tell. Her shallow breathing was all that broke the stillness. Fisher let out a quiet sigh and rubbed his eyes. He had no idea what to do next. He had only wanted to help, but now he was stuck in this world, a world where people like him didn't belong. A sound broke the stillness, just the faintest rustling of dry grass. Fisher stiffened, his heart jumping into his throat. He'd been so focused on the woman that he hadn't noticed the shift in the air. Footsteps. Fisher darted to his feet, peering through the cracked barn door. He could just make out the figure of a man walking slowly toward them, his dark silhouette framed by the fading twilight. The figure didn't seem to be in a rush, but there was no mistaking the power in the man's gait. Fisher's heart raced. It was him, the man from the bridge. He stepped back, swallowing hard. The man's presence felt like a threat, suffocating the air around him. Fisher wanted to run, to grab the woman and flee. But where could he go? The trees beyond the barn stretched for miles, and the man would find them eventually. They had no choice but to stay hidden. The door creaked ever so slightly, and Fisher froze. His instinct screamed for him to bolt. His feet wanted to move, but his legs were frozen in place. The man's voice sliced through the silence. Low, steady. "I know you're in there." Fisher's blood ran cold. He didn't have time to think. His only option was to stay quiet, to hope the man would pass by. But something told him the man wasn't just searching for someone. He was hunting. The man called out again. "You can't hide from me. I know you saved her." Fisher's breath caught in his throat. How could he know? How could he possibly? "No, come out," the man commanded, his voice sharp. "You don't have to make this harder than it is." Fisher's hand brushed against the old wooden wall, feeling for something, anything to use as a shield. But there was nothing. He felt as if the very walls were closing in on him. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, deafening him to anything else. The air felt thick, and every breath he took was laced with fear. But then, just as Fisher thought he might break from the pressure of it all, the woman stirred. Her voice, barely a whisper, cracked the stillness. Don't let him take me." She lifted her head slowly, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Please." Fisher's heart dropped. He didn't have the strength to fight. He was just a boy. He had no way to protect her from the kind of man who could make her disappear without anyone asking questions. The footsteps outside grew louder, and Fisher clenched his fists, trying to hold back the tremble in his hands. He couldn't let this happen. Not again. He glanced back at the woman, whose eyes were wide with terror. It was as though the weight of the world was on her shoulders, a burden she couldn't escape. Fisher took a deep breath, steadying himself. There had to be a way out of this. The man's voice rang out once more insistent this time. "I said come out. I won't ask again." Fisher's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He had to act. Now. He grabbed the woman's hand, pulling her up with surprising force. She gasped, her legs weak, but she managed to steady herself with his help. "We're not staying here," he whispered, his voice determined. "We have to leave now." The woman hesitated, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "But he'll find us." "We'll keep moving," Fisher said firmly, "and we'll hide until we're safe." The woman nodded, her fear still evident. But a glimmer of something stronger than fear, flashed in her eyes. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. They moved quickly, silently, slipping through the back of the barn where the darkness was deeper, the trees thicker. Fisher's feet barely made a sound as he led her away from the barn, from the man, into the forest that stretched out before them. They walked for what felt like hours, the silence between them growing more comfortable as they put distance between themselves and the danger. Fisher's mind raced with thoughts of the man. Who was he? What did he want? And why was he so obsessed with the woman? But the questions would have to wait. They had to survive first. As they walked, Fisher's thoughts wandered to his grandmother. She would be so worried by now. He hadn't meant to leave her, but she wouldn't understand. She wouldn't understand any of this. Finally, they reached a small clearing. Fisher stopped, his breath coming in short bursts, and turned to look at the woman. She was exhausted, but she was still standing. "We'll stay here for the night," Fisher said, his voice low. "We'll figure out what to do in the morning," the woman nodded, sitting down carefully on the ground, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't speak, but Fisher could see the weight of her past in her eyes. There was something more to her story, something deeper than what she had let on. As Fisher sat down beside her, the cool night air wrapping around them, the fire of determination inside him burned even brighter. He wasn't just running from danger anymore. He was running towards something that would change his life forever. But for now, he had to keep her safe. He had to keep moving forward. And as the first stars appeared in the sky above, Fisher realized just how far from home he had come. The night air was cold, biting at Fisher's skin as he huddled next to the woman in the clearing. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline of the escape still coursing through him. He had never felt such a weight in his life. The darkness surrounding them seemed to mirror the uncertainty swirling in his mind. There was so much he didn't understand, so much he still didn't know about the woman, about the man chasing them, and about what exactly he had just done. He glanced at her, her face drawn with exhaustion, her eyes haunted, as if she were seeing something far away, something that had no place in the present moment. Fisher didn't know how long they would stay here or what the next step would be. He only knew that staying in one place too long would put them at risk. "Do you think he'll come after us?" Fisher asked, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid that even speaking too loudly might betray their position. The woman didn't answer at first. She just stared at the flickering shadows cast by the small fire Fisher had managed to start, with the few scraps of wood he could find. Finally, her voice came, quiet and strained. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Fisher's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected her to say that. He had been hoping she might tell him it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that maybe they'd be safe now. But she seemed to know something he didn't, something that chilled him to the bone. "What does he want?" Fisher asked, his words barely audible in the vastness of the forest around them. The woman looked at him, her gaze sharp and calculating, as if deciding whether or not she could trust him with the truth. She swallowed hard, then nodded, as though she had come to a decision. "His name is Edward Milligan. He's a man of power, a wealthy businessman, and he's ruthless. He doesn't care who he hurts as long as he gets what he wants." She paused, her lips trembling. "And right now, he wants me." Fisher could feel the weight of her words settle over him like a storm cloud. The man he had seen at the bridge. This was no ordinary person. He was dangerous, and he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Fisher's hand trembled as he reached for the woman's arm. "What did you do to him?" he asked, his voice thick with confusion and fear. "Why does he want you?" The woman hesitated, her gaze darting away as if she were trying to avoid his piercing questions. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage before speaking. "It's not just me," she said softly. I'm part of something much bigger, something I can't explain right now. But Edward, he's involved in things, dark things, and I tried to stop him. I tried to expose him." Fisher's heart raced. He didn't know what she meant by dark things, but he could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of regret that clung to her every word. She had been caught up in something dangerous, and now, it seemed, she was paying the price for trying to do the right thing. "Why did you try to expose him?" Fisher asked, unable to hide the confusion in his voice. Her eyes flickered with emotion, fear, sadness, and something else. A deep sorrow that lingered in the air between them. She took a breath before continuing, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could make a difference, but I was naive. I didn't realize just how deep his corruption ran. He has people everywhere, controlling things, pulling strings. And now he's after me because I know too much." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Fisher's mind was spinning. None of this made sense. He was just a poor kid from a small village. What could he possibly do in a situation like this? He was scared, terrified really. But even more than that, he felt a deep, gut-wrenching responsibility to help her. He had saved her once. Could he do it again? "You don't have to face him alone," Fisher said, his voice more confident than he felt. "I'll help you. I'll protect you." The woman turned her gaze to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something Fisher couldn't place. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, a noise interrupted them. The crackling of leaves, a rustle in the bushes. Fisher's heart skipped a beat. His senses were on high alert. They weren't alone. "Shh," Fisher hissed, his hand instinctively going to the small pocket knife he'd been carrying. The woman's eyes widened in fear, and she grabbed his arm tightly. "Hide," she whispered urgently. "Now." Fisher didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed her by the wrist and pulled her into the dense underbrush, his feet moving as silently as possible. He kept his head low, eyes scanning the surroundings. His breathing came in short bursts as they crouched behind a thick patch of shrubs, barely daring to move. They stayed perfectly still, listening, waiting. The noise came again, closer this time. Fisher's breath hitched when a shadow moved past. Them, the silhouette of a man just a few feet away. Fisher's heart thudded in his chest. It was him, the man from the bridge. He was looking for them. Fisher held his breath, pressing his back against the cold, wet earth. Every part of him screamed to run, to flee as far as possible. But he knew that wasn't an option. Not yet, not until he had a plan. The man's footsteps faltered. He stopped, just ahead of them, his shadow stretching long and ominous in the wide-eyed, dim light. Fisher's grip tightened on the woman's arm, his mind racing. The next move would have to be quick, decisive. He could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him, the guilt of everything that had led him to this moment, hanging heavy on his shoulders. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man moved again, his footsteps fading into the distance. The woman let out a shaky breath and pulled away from Fisher, her eyes wide with shock. "That was too close," she whispered, her voice trembling. Fisher didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was still spinning, his heart still racing. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable, and the guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. "I'm not ready for this," he muttered under his breath. "I'm just a kid. I shouldn't be here." The woman turned toward him, her face softer now, understanding in her eyes. "You've already done more than anyone else would have." But Fisher wasn't so sure. He felt like a child in a world that was far too big for him. The pressure, the danger, the overwhelming uncertainty, it all felt too much. But he had no choice now. They were in this together, and the only way out was forward. The night grew colder, and the silence between Fisher and the woman became palpable. The adrenaline that had kept them both on edge began to fade, replaced by the creeping realization of what had just happened, and what might happen next. Fisher lay there, staring at the dark sky above them. He could barely make out the stars, but they seemed distant, almost as if they were mocking him, reminding him of how far removed he was from anything familiar, anything safe. His mind was a tangle of confusion, guilt, and fear. He had made a choice, he had acted in the moment, but now, as the weight of what they had done sank in, he couldn't help but wonder if it had been the right one. Beside him, the woman shifted, pulling her jacket tighter around herself, the fabric rustling softly in the stillness. "Are we really safe here?" Fisher asked, his voice low and unsure. The woman didn't answer immediately. She stared into the distance, her face reflecting a quiet sadness that Fisher couldn't quite place. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now, but we can't stay here long. They'll be looking for us." Fisher's stomach twisted. The fear in her voice was palpable, and it only heightened his own unease. He had never been in a situation like this before. This wasn't some adventure story he had read about in books. This was real. The stakes were life and death. "Why did you run from him? What's going to happen now?" Fisher asked, his voice breaking the silence again. She looked at him, her expression guarded. Fisher could see the pain in her eyes, the kind of pain that came from years of living in a world where trust was a fragile thing. She had secrets. Fisher could tell, and he wanted to know them, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear the truth. "I told you," she said quietly. Edward Milligan is dangerous, and he's not just after me. He's involved in things that go beyond just money and power, things that no one should know about. Fisher didn't say anything at first. He didn't understand what she meant, but he knew she was hiding something. What could be worse than the kind of man who would throw his own daughter from a bridge just to see her die? How deep did it go? Like what? Fisher asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would somehow summon the danger they were trying to escape. The woman took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging with the weight of a history she wasn't ready to share. She looked down at her hands, as if the answer was written in the creases of her palms. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said softly. "I believe you," Fisher replied without hesitation. "You wouldn't be running if it wasn't real." Her eyes flicked toward him, searching his face as if she were trying to gauge his sincerity. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves around them. Then, finally, she spoke. "Edward Milligan is a part of something bigger than just himself. He's part of an organization, an underground network that operates in the shadows. They're involved in everything from illegal arms dealing to human trafficking. And I found out. I got too close. They had to silence me." Fisher's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about a corrupt businessman. This was something far darker, more sinister than he had ever imagined. His mind reeled. How could a man like that exist? How could he live so openly without anyone knowing what he truly was? "I tried to expose him," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could stop it. I thought I could make a difference. But they found out, and they're coming for me, and anyone who knows too much." Fisher's head spun with all of this new information. He had thought he was just helping a woman escape a terrible situation. But now, the consequences were much greater. This wasn't just about saving her anymore. This was about stopping something that could destroy countless lives. "Then why did you even try?" Fisher asked, his voice tinged with frustration and confusion. "Why put yourself in danger like that?" She looked at him with a weary gaze, her eyes filled with a sadness that he could feel deep in his bones. "Because I had to," she replied, softly. "Because no one else would, and because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, as if the world had stopped spinning for just a moment. Fisher didn't know how to respond. He had always thought of the world in simple terms, good guys, bad guys, right and wrong. But now, he was starting to see things in shades of gray, and it terrified him. "I don't know what to do now," Fisher said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "You're doing it," she replied, her voice firm, but there was a softness to it too. "You saved my life, and that's more than anyone else has done for me in a long time." Fisher swallowed hard. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like he had done anything remarkable. All he had done was act on instinct. But as he looked at the woman who had placed so much trust in him, he realized that perhaps there was more to this than he had thought. Maybe this was his moment to do something bigger, to make a difference. Just then, the air around them seemed to grow still, and Fisher felt a sudden tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He looked up at the woman, whose face had gone pale. "They're coming," she said, her voice low and urgent. Fisher's heart dropped. He didn't know what to do. The fear in her eyes mirrored the fear in his chest. He had to think fast. There was no time to waste. He had to protect her. He had to figure out a way to stop them before it was too late. "I'll lead them away," Fisher said, surprising himself with the words. He didn't know how, but he had to try. He couldn't let her be caught again. The woman grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "No, you can't. You don't know how dangerous he is." Fisher met her gaze, his face set with determination. "I know, but we're running out of options and I won't let you die." The woman's eyes softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of something. Hope, perhaps. It was gone, as quickly as it came, but it had been there just long enough to remind him that they still had a chance. "I'll follow you," she said quietly, "but we have to move quickly." And with that, they both rose to their feet, the cold night air surrounding them as they began to move. fleeing, running, hoping against all odds that they could outrun the danger that was closing in around them. But Fisher couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter how fast they ran, they were already too far gone. The silence in the woods was heavy, almost suffocating. Fisher could hear the distant rustling of leaves as the wind stirred the trees, but it didn't comfort him. The night felt colder, now, sharper somehow. His mind raced, replaying the moments after their narrow escape. Every sound, every movement felt like a threat. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He glanced at the woman beside him, her features softened by the faint light of the fire they had managed to rekindle. The flames flickered and crackled, casting dancing shadows on her face. She seemed lost. In her thoughts, eyes distant as though her mind was still back at the bridge, trapped in the moment of her near death. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? The woman was the first to break the silence. Her voice was soft, but it held an underlying strength that Fisher hadn't expected. "We can't stay here for long," she said, her gaze never leaving the fire. "We have to keep moving." Fisher nodded, though a knot formed in his stomach. The idea of moving again, constantly running, didn't sit well with him. But he knew she was right. They couldn't risk staying in one place for too long. The man from the bridge would be back, and he wouldn't stop until he had them. "Where will we go?" Fisher asked, his voice hoarse from the tension. The woman looked at him, her eyes dark with the weight of the situation. "We need to find answers. We need to figure out what he's really after, and why he wants me so badly." Fisher's brow furrowed in confusion. "You said you tried to expose him, but what's he hiding? What is it that makes him so dangerous?" She hesitated before answering, as if the weight of her own words was too much to bear. "He's involved in illegal arms dealing, human trafficking, things far worse than anything I ever imagined. He has so many people in his pocket, politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement. That's why he's untouchable." Fisher's stomach twisted. He had no idea what kind of world he had just stepped into. The words human trafficking and illegal arms dealing hit him like a punch to the gut. It was a world of darkness and power that seemed far removed from his own reality, and yet he was now a part of it. "So you tried to stop him?" he asked, struggling to wrap his mind around everything. She nodded slowly, her face hardening. "I couldn't just stand by while he destroyed lives, but now I'm his target. And you, Fisher, you're involved now too. He won't stop until we're both dead." Fisher swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never asked for this. He was just a boy, a poor kid from a small town. He hadn't signed up for anything like this. But now, there was no turning back. "I'm not going to let him hurt you," Fisher said, his voice filled with a determination he didn't quite understand. The woman looked at him, her expression softening for a moment. "I'm not used to having someone care about me. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Fisher met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I don't care. I'm not going to let him win." There was a long pause, as if the weight of their situation hung in the air between them. Then, without warning, a sharp noise broke the silence, distant but growing closer. Fisher's heart jumped into his throat. He glanced around frantically, his pulse quickening. The sound of footsteps, they were being followed. "Get up," the woman said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to move now." Without a word, Fisher sprang to his feet, his legs stiff, with exhaustion but his instincts sharp. They had to get away, fast. But just as he was about to grab her arm, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. Fisher froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure was tall, shadowed by the trees, but there was no mistaking it. It was the man from the bridge. "Run!" the woman hissed, pulling Fisher's arm to yank him away, but it was too late. The man, Edward Milligan, stepped forward with an eerie calmness. His face was lit by the dying embers of the fire, and his cold eyes locked onto theirs. "I didn't think it would be this easy," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "You two really thought you could escape me?" Fisher's mind raced, but his body was frozen. The woman's hand gripped his tightly, but even she looked as though she knew the battle ahead of them might be unwinnable. "What do you want?" the woman asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Edward's lips curled into a twisted smile. You know exactly what I want, Emma, but now, I think I'll take both of you. You'll make a nice little prize for me. Fisher felt his stomach drop. He couldn't let her go. He couldn't let this man take them. With a surge of adrenaline, Fisher grabbed the small pocket knife from his pocket, his fingers slick with sweat. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The woman, Emma, looked at him with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Don't, she whispered urgently. It's not worth it. But Fisher didn't listen. He charged at Edward with all the fury his small frame could muster, swinging the knife wildly. Edward sidestepped effortlessly, his grin widening as he looked down at Fisher with amusement. You're a brave little boy, Edward said with mock sympathy. But you're just in. Over your head. Fisher felt the rush of fear and anger mixed together, a cocktail of emotion that propelled him forward. But just as he swung again, Edward's hand shot out, grabbing Fisher by the wrist and twisting it until he cried out in pain. You should have stayed away, Edward muttered. Now you're mine. Emma acted fast, kicking Edward in the knee. He grunted, releasing Fisher's wrist for a split second. But that was all they needed. Fisher scrambled to his feet, pain shooting up his arm as he forced himself to stand. The woman was already pulling him away toward the trees, but Edward was fast. Get to the river, she shouted. We can lose him there. Fisher didn't need to be told twice. They ran, their footsteps pounding against the earth as the man's furious voice echoed behind them. But no matter how fast they ran, Fisher couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 6. The rush of adrenaline in Fisher's veins only pushed him harder as he and Emma darted through the trees. Their footfalls were muffled by the thick underbrush, but every snap of a twig beneath their feet sent a jolt of terror through Fisher's body. He could feel his chest tighten with each breath, and he could hear the man's voice, low and menacing, calling after them. Edward wasn't far behind. Don't let him catch us, Emma urged, pulling Fisher along. He had never run so fast in his life, not even when he'd raced to school to avoid being late. They reached the river's edge. The dark water rippled under the moonlight, glistening like a sheet of black glass. The current wasn't strong, but the cold water looked like a perfect hiding spot, if they could get in fast enough. Do you know where you're going? Fisher asked, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body was exhausted, but he had to keep moving. Emma didn't answer. Right away. She was scanning the area, her eyes narrowed. I know enough, she said, pulling him toward a small ledge that overlooked the river. Get ready to jump. Fisher looked at the water below them, trying to steady his racing heart. It was too risky. What if they hit rocks? But before he could voice his concern, Emma was already stepping over the edge, dropping into the water with a soft splash. His instincts screamed at him to stop, to think about this. But he didn't have time. The man was getting closer. Fisher followed, her leaping from the edge and landing awkwardly in the cold water. He gasped, the shock of the cold sinking deep into his bones. The current was strong enough to push him sideways, but he managed to keep his footing. Swim, Emma said urgently, her eyes wide as she glanced back toward the trees. We need to get to the other side. Fisher didn't hesitate. He kicked, off from the riverbank, the current pulling him further into the water. His legs burned with the effort, but he kept his focus on Emma, who was swimming ahead with surprising grace despite the weight of her soaked clothes. Keep up, she called over her shoulder, her voice strained but determined. Fisher gritted his teeth, pushing through the current. The cold was biting at his skin, and he could feel his limbs growing weaker, but he couldn't stop now. They had no choice. Suddenly, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The shot rang out across the water, echoing through the trees. Fisher's heart skipped a beat. He looked back, but all he could see was the blackness of the woods, shrouded in shadows. Go! Emma screamed. Faster! Fisher's body seemed to freeze for a second, a knot of fear tightening in his stomach. The man was shooting at them. Edward wasn't playing anymore. The realization hit him hard. This was real. This wasn't some game. They were being hunted. A cold, sick feeling washed over him. But there was no time for fear. He had to make it to the other side. The bank on the far side of the river was a shadowy outline in the distance. They were close, but the current was relentless. Fisher's legs were starting to feel like jelly. Another gunshot rang out, this time closer, and Fisher's heart leaped into his throat. The bullet splashed into the water just behind him, sending a spray of droplets into the air. "Move!" Emma cried, her voice filled with desperation. Fisher's head swam with panic. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going. The current was too strong, and his muscles were screaming at him to stop. And then he saw it on the far bank, through the trees, a shadow moving toward the water. Fisher's breath caught in his chest. It was Edward. His figure was outlined against the faint light of the moon, stalking along the bank with his gun raised, his eyes fixed on them. The man wasn't even out of breath. It was like he was playing a game and they were the prey. Fisher's thoughts raced. He could see Emma pushing ahead, her strokes more powerful than his. She was almost there. He had to catch up. But then, the worst happened. As Fisher's hand reached for the ledge of the riverbank, he slipped, his feet losing purchase on the slippery rocks beneath the surface. For a moment he felt himself sinking, his heart pounding in his ears. The cold water, swallowing him whole. No, not like this. Desperation clawed at his chest. With one last burst of energy, he kicked off the riverbed, his arms flailing for the surface. He broke free just in time to see Emma's hand reach down for him. "Grab on!" she shouted, pulling him toward the safety of the shore. Fisher's fingers closed around her wrist, and with a sharp tug, she hauled him up, collapsing on the wet grass beside him. Fisher gasped for air, his chest heaving as he tried to steady himself. The adrenaline was coursing through him, making everything feel like a blur. Behind them, Edward was still moving along the water's edge, his footsteps slow but deliberate. Fisher could feel the tension in the air. Edward had them trapped. Emma pulled him to his feet, her face set with resolve. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice low and urgent. "There's no way we can outrun him now. We have to fight." Fisher's mind raced. Fight? He barely knew how to hold a knife, let alone face a man like Edward. But Emma's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not letting him take us." Before Fisher could respond, Edward's voice carried through the trees. "There's nowhere left to run. You can't escape." Fisher's heart pounded in his chest. The moment of confrontation had arrived. There was no more running, no more hiding. They would have to face him. Fisher took a deep breath. He looked at Emma, and in that moment, he knew what they had to do. The stillness of the forest was interrupted, only by the sound of the river's current and the faint rustling of branches. Fisher's heart was still thundering in his chest as he stood on the riverbank, drenched and shaking. Emma's grip on his arm was firm, her expression as cold and calculating as a soldier's. They had no choice but to face Edward, but neither of them was ready to face the truth of what that meant. "Listen to me," Emma said, her voice low, barely above a whisper. "You need to stay calm. He won't stop until he has us. He's done this before." Fisher barely registered her words. The shock was starting to fade, but the fear was setting in. He looked over his shoulder at Edward, who was emerging from the trees with a chillingly calm demeanor. The gun was still raised, but it didn't seem like he was in a hurry. He was enjoying this, enjoying the hunt. "Don't let him see your fear," Emma continued, her voice steadier. "Now." She took a step forward, squaring her shoulders. "I need you to stay with me, Fisher. We can do this. We just have to outsmart him." Fisher nodded, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He had been running away from danger for so long, hiding from the truths he didn't want to face. Now, there was nowhere left to run. "Don't listen to her," Edward called, out his voice clear and mocking as he approached. "You think you can escape? You think I'll let you ruin everything I've worked for?" Fisher stiffened. The words cut deeper than he expected. They hit something inside him, something fragile, something he had tried to bury. His mind flashed back to the events of the past weeks, the promises, the lies, the people he had tried to protect. It was all starting to unravel. The truth was out there, and it was far more dangerous than any gunshot. Ruined everything? Fisher's voice cracked as he stepped forward. The words seemed to come out before he could stop them. You think you're the only one who's lost something? Edward's face contorted, the smug grin slipping for a moment as the tension in his shoulders tightened. What are you talking about? He spat. Emma isn't the only one you've been hunting, Fisher said, his voice louder now, the defiance rising inside him. You've been after me too, haven't you? You've been lying, manipulating people to keep your secrets. Edward's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Fisher saw the flicker of uncertainty, but it was quickly replaced by a cruel smile. You really don't get it, do you? Edward said, shaking his head slowly. You're nothing, you've always been nothing. The sooner you realize that, the easier it will be for you. Fisher's heart skipped a beat. He was used to being nothing. He'd lived that way his whole life. But this felt different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far deeper. You don't get it either, Fisher said, his voice steady, but the weight of his words hung in the air. You think power means control, but it doesn't. It never does. Edward took a step closer, the gun never wavering. Then why are you still alive? He asked coldly. Fisher swallowed, his throat dry, but Emma was right there beside him, her eyes fierce and unwavering. They weren't running anymore. They weren't hiding. We're not running, Fisher said, his words echoing with resolve. We're staying. Edward paused for a long moment, studying Fisher. The gun in his hand was raised higher now, aimed directly at Fisher's chest. But even as the barrel of the gun stared him down, Fisher felt something inside him click. Something that told him he wasn't going to go down without a fight. Is that so? Edward said, his voice like ice. You think you can beat me, boy? Fisher didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the cold steel of a small knife, something he had taken from the campfire that morning. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He had to protect Emma. He had to protect them both. Edward saw the movement, his eyes flashing with anger. Put that down, you fool. You think that's going to save you? But Fisher didn't back down. He stepped closer to Emma, standing side by side with her, the knife barely visible in his hand. Edward's gaze flicked between them. The air was thick with tension. Fisher could feel the weight of the gun in his back, could feel it digging into his spine. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. He wasn't going to be intimidated anymore. Put the gun down, Edward, Emma said, her voice calm but sharp. It's over. We know what you've done. We know everything. The words hit harder than Fisher expected. The way Emma said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, made everything seem so real. They weren't the prey anymore. They had something Edward didn't. They had the truth. Edward's face twisted in disbelief, but the anger was still there. You think I care about the truth? He growled. You think I care about your petty little lives? Fisher tightened, his grip on the knife, the small weapon, feeling almost absurd in his hand. But as he looked at Emma, her expression calm, there was a clarity in his chest. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was standing up for something bigger than himself, bigger than Emma. It was about justice. Put it down, Edward, Fisher repeated, his voice quieter now. Before it's too late. Edward's lip curled into a smirk, and for a brief moment Fisher thought he might actually fire. But the man hesitated, a flicker of doubt passing across his face. It was just long enough. Fisher lunged forward. The world seemed to slow as Fisher moved, the knife a blur in his hand. The moment they made contact, it was chaos. Fisher was stronger than he thought, and Emma wasn't about to let Edward take the first strike. The world around them seemed to explode in noise and movement, and then everything went silent. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth, and the sound of the river rushing below was deafening in the silence that followed the clash. Fisher's heart was pounding in his chest, his breath ragged and uneven. The sharp metal of the knife he held was now slick with blood, and as his eyes flickered between Edward's limp form and Emma's trembling hands, it felt like a moment suspended. In time, the stillness didn't last long. Emma was the first to move, crouching down beside Fisher, her fingers brushing the weapon he still gripped tightly in his hand. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice low, urgent. "Now." Fisher could hardly process the words at first. He had just taken a life. The weight of the action crashed over him like a wave, but there was no time to reflect. No time for remorse. The danger was still too real. Edward's blood stained the dirt beneath them, his body twisted in an unnatural position. The coldness of it made Fisher's stomach churn, but Emma's voice broke through the haze. "Fisher, we need to move." Nodded, snapping himself out of the fog of shock that was beginning to settle in. There would be time for the aftermath later. Right now, they had to run. "Come on," Emma urged, pulling him gently by the arm. Fisher stumbled slightly, his legs still weak from the adrenaline rush. Emma moved quickly, leading him toward the thicket at the edge of the clearing, where the trees would provide them cover. As they ducked into the dense foliage, the weight of their situation became even more palpable. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. Edward's death wouldn't be overlooked. They had made an enemy of someone with far too much power. And now there was no turning back. "Where are we going?" Fisher asked, his voice hoarse as they pushed through the underbrush. Emma didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned the path ahead, her mind racing. "I don't know yet. We just need to get away from here. We can't stay in the open." Fisher's gaze lingered behind them, toward the clearing where they had just fought for their lives. Edward's body lay motionless, but the feeling of his presence, his threat, still loomed in the air. A man like Edward wouldn't stay down for long. There would be people looking for him, and Fisher knew that once they realized he was dead, the search for them would be relentless. "We'll figure it out," Emma added, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Just keep moving." They made their way deeper into the woods, the sounds of the river fading as the trees closed in around them. The night was thick with shadows, and the only light came from the occasional sliver of moonlight that pierced through the canopy above. It felt like they were slipping into another world, one where they could escape the horrors of the one they had just left behind. But Fisher knew it wouldn't last long. They were far from safe. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had no meaning. Anymore, Fisher's legs were burning, and his mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts he couldn't quite process. What had they done? What had they become? And most importantly, what was Edward going to do next? Emma's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "We need to rest for a minute." Fisher blinked, surprised to realize how much the exhaustion had taken hold of him. They had been running non-stop, and now his body was giving out. His eyes were heavy, his muscles sore. He didn't realize how much he needed to stop until Emma had already found a small hollow under a cluster of trees, a temporary refuge from the world outside. "Here," Emma said, settling herself down against the roots of the tree. "Sit with me for a moment." Fisher collapsed beside her, his breath shallow as he leaned back against the rough bark. The cold dampness of the forest floor seeped through his clothes, but he couldn't bring himself to care. The adrenaline had worn off, and now he was left with the crushing weight of everything that had happened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside their small refuge seemed so far away, like it no longer mattered. The chaos, the gunfire, Edward's death, it all felt like a different life, a distant memory. "What now?" Fisher asked, his voice breaking the silence. Emma exhaled deeply, rubbing her forehead as if trying to push away the fatigue. "Now we survive. We don't go back to the village. We don't go anywhere familiar. We stay hidden, find a way to clear our names." Fisher looked at her, searching for any trace of doubt or fear in her eyes. There was none. Emma was as determined as ever. It was that certainty that kept him grounded, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. "But what about—" Fisher started, but Emma cut him off. "We can't worry about what we've left behind. We can't fix everything right now. We can't undo the past, but we can fight for what's left." Fisher nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. He had been running from his past, from his mistakes, from the people he had failed. But now, for the first time, he wasn't running anymore. He had nowhere left to hide. Emma's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. You did what? You had to do. I'm not going to judge you for it. Fisher swallowed hard, his throat dry. I didn't want to kill him. I know, she said gently, but sometimes there's no other choice. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Fisher thought about the future, about the road ahead. It was uncertain, full of danger, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid. Emma was right. They would fight for what was left, and they would survive. The morning light filtered softly through the trees, casting a golden hue over the forest floor. It had been a restless night for Fisher. His body ached from the run. His mind swirled with confusion and guilt. And despite the safety of their temporary refuge, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Emma, however, had managed to sleep, her exhaustion more pronounced than his, and now she was already awake, preparing their next steps. Fisher sat up slowly, wiping the sleep from his eyes and running a hand through his tangled hair. The air was crisp, and the sound of distant birds brought a small sense of normalcy. It felt wrong, this sense of calm, considering everything that had happened. They had just murdered a man in cold blood, one of the most powerful men in the Dythe village, and now they were on the run, hiding like criminals. Morning, Emma said, not looking up from where she was arranging a small bundle of provisions. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was a weariness beneath it that Fisher couldn't ignore. Morning, he replied, rubbing his face. What now? Emma paused, her eyes flicking to him as she wrapped a piece of cloth around a bundle of dried herbs. We keep moving. We can't stay here for long. People will be looking for us. Fisher nodded. His mind, though foggy from exhaustion, began to process the situation more clearly. He had to focus on what was next. He had no other choice. Emma was right, they couldn't just hide forever. There was a bigger problem now. What do we do when they catch up with us? Fisher asked, his voice low. The question had been gnawing at him since they'd fled the village. It felt inevitable. We can't outrun them forever. Emma's eyes darkened at the thought, and she straightened her back. We don't let them catch us. We have to fight. Fisher looked at her, surprised by the fire in her eyes. There was something raw, something desperate, about the way she spoke. She wasn't just talking about survival anymore. She was talking about justice. You don't really think we can beat them, do you? Fisher asked. Emma met his gaze, unwavering. We don't have a choice. There's more at play here than just a man's death. We need to figure out why he was after us in the first place. We need to understand what's going on and why we're caught in the middle of it. Fisher blinked, realizing the weight of her words. He had been so focused on their immediate survival that he hadn't thought much about the bigger picture. Why had Edward targeted them? Why had they been dragged into this web of corruption and violence? We have to find the truth, Emma said softly, as though reading his mind. We can't outrun it. Not anymore. Fisher exhaled sharply, his chest tight. He had no idea where to start, but he knew one thing. The truth was out there, and they needed to find it no matter the cost. They packed their things quickly, taking only what they could carry, knowing they couldn't stay in the same place for long. Fisher took one last look at their makeshift camp, the memory of last night's events still fresh in his mind. Edward's body, the fight, the blood, none of it felt real, like it had all happened in a dream. Let's go, Emma said, her voice resolute. They moved through the forest with purpose, their footsteps light but swift. Fisher felt the weight of their situation settling over him again. The air was thick with tension. Every snap of a twig beneath their feet seemed amplified, every rustle in the bushes a threat. But Emma led the way with such confidence that Fisher couldn't help but follow. As the hours passed, they made their way toward the town on the outskirts of the forest. Fisher knew it was risky. If anyone saw them, recognized them, they would be finished. But Emma insisted that they had to find answers, and the town was the only place that might hold some. The walk was long, and the silence between them became heavier with each step. Fisher's thoughts kept circling back to Edward. What was the man's real motive? Why had he done what he had? The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up, but no answers seemed forthcoming. Finally, as dusk began to settle in, they reached the outskirts of town. Fisher's pulse quickened. He could feel the tension in the air, could almost taste the danger that lingered in the shadows. Emma turned to him, her eyes steady, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "We're going to have to be careful," she whispered. "The people here may know us, but we have to find someone who can help us." Fisher nodded. He wasn't sure who could help them now, but Emma was right. There was no other option. They crept through the back alleys, keeping out of sight. Fisher's heart hammered in his chest as they passed the familiar buildings, the once comforting sights now feeling foreign and threatening. His mind kept returning to the moment when he had killed Edward and the chaos that had followed. It had all been too fast, too much. He hadn't had time to think, only to act. But was it the right choice? His doubts were interrupted by a voice calling from the shadows ahead. "Emma." Fisher froze. His body tensed, every muscle locked in place. Emma turned toward the sound, her face lighting up with recognition. "Bryce?" she asked, her voice tentative. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and thin, his features partly hidden beneath a worn cap. His clothes were weathered and ragged, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, immediately locked onto Emma with an intensity that made Fisher uneasy. "You're alive," Bryce said, his voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I thought you were dead." "I should be," Emma replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. "But I'm not." Bryce's gaze flicked to Fisher, his eyes narrowing as he sized him up. "Who's this?" "Fisher," Emma said quickly. He's with me." Bryce took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "You two need to be careful. There are people looking for you, people who won't stop until they find you." Fisher's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" Bryce looked around cautiously, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know why Edward was after you. I know what's at stake, and I know how we can bring it all down." Fisher's pulse raced. This was the moment. This was the lead they had been waiting for. But was Bryce telling them the truth, and could they really trust him? The night was darker than usual, as they walked further into the shadows of the town, away from the familiar streets. Fisher couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in his gut the moment they met Bryce. There was something off about the way the man moved, the way he spoke. Emma seemed to trust him, but Fisher wasn't so sure. As they slipped between narrow alleys, Bryce led them to an old building, its brick walls cracked and weathered by time. The windows were boarded up, and the door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Fisher's eyes adjusted to the faint light, and he saw shelves lined with dusty jars, old furniture, and papers scattered across a table in the corner. "Stay close," Bryce warned, his voice low as he stepped inside. Emma followed without hesitation, but Fisher lingered for a moment. He glanced back down the street, half expecting someone to be watching them. The quiet of the town felt ominous, the absence of people unsettling. "What is this place?" Fisher asked, his voice tight. "Safe house," Bryce answered, his back to them as he lit an oil lamp on the table. "For people like you." Fisher raised an eyebrow. "People like me?" Bryce turned to face him, his eyes dark and unreadable. "People who are running from something bigger than themselves." Emma stepped forward, sensing the tension. "What exactly do you know about Edward?" Bryce didn't answer immediately. He was fiddling with a piece of paper, smoothing it out on the table before looking up at her. "I know enough to get you both out of this mess, but it's going to require trust. Do you have that?" Fisher could feel the weight of the room pressing in on him. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to question this stranger. But there was something about Emma's desperate need for answers that overpowered his doubts. She had already been through so much. He looked at her. Her expression hardened with resolve, and sighed. "What's the plan?" Bryce's lips curled. into a thin smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "There's a document. It's the key to everything. If you want to understand why Edward came after you, why he was so hell-bent on silencing you both, you need to find it." "Where is it?" Emma asked, leaning forward. Bryce's eyes flicked to Fisher, then back to her. "You won't find it in town. It's not here. But I know where it is." He hesitated, as if weighing something in his mind. "The problem is, getting it won't be easy." Fisher clenched his fists. "What kind of problem are we talking about here?" Bryce looked around the room, his eyes shifting nervously. "The kind of problem that gets people killed." A chill ran down Fisher's spine. He wasn't sure if Bryce was bluffing or if he was telling the truth, but the stakes had already been set. Fisher knew what was at risk. They had no choice now but to keep moving forward, no matter the danger. "We don't have much time," Bryce continued. "The people who are looking for you, they don't care about justice. They care about power. They'll stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe." Fisher looked at Emma, who seemed deep in thought, her eyes narrowing as she processed the gravity of the situation. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty hanging in the air. "You'll need to leave town tonight," Bryce replied. "We have a safe route out, but we have to move fast. The longer we stay, the more likely it is they'll catch on." Fisher felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He didn't like the sound of it, but they had no choice. The truth was out there, and they had to get to it before it was buried forever. "You're sure about this?" Fisher asked, still unsure whether to trust Bryce. "You're really going to help us?" Bryce nodded, his expression hardening. "I don't have much choice either. I've been running from these people for a long time. If they find out I helped you—" He trailed off, and the unspoken threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. "Then let's get moving," Fisher said, the words coming out sharper than he intended. Emma gave him a small, encouraging smile, but even she could sense the danger closing in around them. They made their way back into the alley, slipping into the night like shadows. Bryce led the way, his movements quick and calculated. Fisher kept a wary eye on their surroundings, every nerve on edge. The town felt different now, more hostile, as if the very air had shifted. As they passed by abandoned buildings and darkened streets, Fisher's mind raced. He couldn't shake the image of Edward's lifeless body. It felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare. But the worst part was the feeling that they hadn't even scratched the surface yet. There was something much larger at play, something dark and twisted that was pulling all the strings. And Fisher had a sinking feeling that whatever it was just getting started. "We need to cross the river," Bryce said suddenly, snapping Fisher out of his thoughts. "There's a cabin on the other side. It's safe there." Fisher nodded, his heart pounding. They didn't have much choice. If they wanted answers, they had to keep moving. But the tension was suffocating, and every step they took felt like they were walking deeper into the heart of a storm. The night was oppressive, with only the faintest light from the stars peeking through the thick, swirling clouds above. The journey across the river had been quiet, too quiet. Fisher's heart still pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the unsolved mysteries of the past few days. Emma walked beside him, her face pale in the dim light, but her determination had not wavered. Bryce had led them across the bridge to a small, inconspicuous cabin hidden deep in the forest. It seemed unremarkable at first, just another old building in a world full of them. But inside there was a strange comfort, a sense of calm in the stillness. Fisher could feel the weight of their surroundings pressing in, the urgency of their mission growing more real with every passing moment. Emma sat down by the fire Bryce had quickly built, her eyes distant but still sharp. She hadn't said much since they left the town, her mind lost in the tangled web of questions and fears. Fisher, though, was restless. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket for a cigarette, his usual nervous habit. But before he could light it, Bryce spoke, his voice low and unyielding. "You're not safe here," he said. "Not for long." Fisher turned to look at him, his eyes narrowing. "We don't have a choice. We need to stay here long enough to figure out what's going on. Bryce shook his head. You don't get it. They know where you are. They've been tracking you from the moment you left the town. Emma's head shot up, a mixture of fear and disbelief flashing across her face. What? How do you know that? Bryce met her gaze steadily, his expression unyielding. They've got eyes everywhere. Edward was just a pawn. You're the real target. Fisher's stomach twisted and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Edward's death was only the beginning. They were in deeper than they'd ever imagined. A loud knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was the kind of knock that made your blood freeze, the kind that meant trouble. Bryce's face immediately hardened. Stay quiet, he hissed. The door creaked open slightly and a voice called from the dark. Bryce, we know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Fisher's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the voice. It was one of the men from the town, the ones who had been chasing them, the ones who had murdered Edward. Bryce's eyes flashed with fear, but he quickly masked it with an expression of cold resolve. You're not getting them, he muttered under his breath as he moved toward the back of the cabin. Emma and Fisher exchanged a quick glance. They didn't need words to know what had to be done. They had to get out. But before they could move, the door was kicked open with such force that it slammed against the wall. A man dressed in all black stood in the doorway. His eyes scanned the room and his lips curled into a cold smile. I warned you, Bryce. You should have stayed out of this. Fisher didn't wait for Bryce to react. He grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her toward the back door, but before they could take a step, the man's voice stopped them cold. Going somewhere? A gunshot rang through the air, and everything seemed to slow down. Fisher turned in time to see Bryce stumble back, clutching his chest. His face twisted in agony, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The gunman advanced, his eyes never leaving Bryce. Get down, Fisher shouted at Emma, but she was already moving, pulling Bryce behind a table for cover. Fisher's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure what was worse, seeing someone he'd just met get shot, or the thought that they might not make it out of this alive. The man with the gun laughed, a cold, empty sound. You should have stayed home, little fisherman. Emma, her voice trembling but determined, shouted back, You're not getting away with this. Someone will stop you. Not today, the man said, his grin widening. Not ever. Fisher couldn't let this man, this monster, take Bryce's life. He wasn't about to let Emma lose anyone else. He moved quickly, his breath quickening. He could see a rifle on the wall behind the man. It was an old weathered thing, but it was better than nothing. Fisher knew he had only one chance. With a quick motion, he leaped up from his hiding place, grabbed the rifle, and fired. The shot rang out, the deafening sound echoing in the small cabin. The gunman turned with a sudden jerk, his eyes wide with shock. Blood poured from the wound in his shoulder, but his hand still clutched his own weapon. Before Fisher could react, the man fired again. The bullet grazed Fisher's arm, causing him to cry out in pain. He stumbled back, but Emma was already moving, grabbing a piece of broken wood from the floor and charging forward. She swung it hard, catching the man in the side of the head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious but still alive. Fisher breathed heavily, his body trembling from adrenaline and pain. He glanced at Emma, who was kneeling beside Bryce. His breathing was shallow, but he was still alive, though barely. Get him inside, Fisher muttered, gritting his teeth against the pain in his arm. We have to move fast. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed Bryce, pulling him into the other room as quickly as she could. But as they got Bryce settled and tended to his wound, Fisher couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of dread that hung in the air. The gunman was down for now, but the danger was far from over. As Bryce's life hung in the balance, Fisher realized just how close they were to losing everything. The hours dragged on like an endless storm, and Fisher couldn't shake the cold dread that had settled deep in his bones. The makeshift bandages on Bryce's chest were already soaked with blood, and although Emma worked tirelessly, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the flow, Fisher could see that time was running out. Bryce's breathing grew more shallow with every passing minute. Fisher knelt beside Emma, his heart heavy with guilt. This was his fault. They never should have come here, never should have gotten involved in this mess. But there was no turning back now. Bryce's eyes fluttered open, his voice barely above, a whisper. "You have to. Leave. Now," he rasped, his lips cracked and dry. Fisher clenched his jaw, refusing to show the fear that gnawed at him. "We're not leaving you behind." "You don't understand," Bryce murmured, shaking his head weakly. "They'll come for you. They'll never stop. Until they get what they want. You have to—" A sudden crash from outside interrupted him, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Fisher's pulse raced. It was them. The men from the town, they were here. "We don't have much time," Fisher muttered. He turned to Emma, his eyes wide with urgency. "We need to get Bryce out of here, now." Emma's hands shook, but she nodded, determination hardening her features. She was scared, but she was not going to let Bryce die. Not like this. Bryce, barely conscious, reached up weakly and grabbed Fisher's wrist. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear as he spoke one last time. Promise me you'll protect her," Bryce whispered, his voice trembling. "Promise me you won't let them take her." Fisher swallowed hard. There was no easy answer. No way to guarantee safety in this world of constant danger, but he nodded anyway. "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma, hearing the exchange, paused in her frantic movement. She didn't speak, but Fisher could feel the weight of her gaze on him. She understood what that promise meant. She understood what was at stake. Another crash sounded from the direction of the front door, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots pounding against the wooden floor. The men were getting closer. "We have to move now," Fisher shouted. With as much strength as they could muster, Emma and Fisher pulled Bryce into the back room, trying to move as quietly as possible. Bryce's labored breathing was like a ticking clock, and Fisher knew they were out of time. They made their way to a small hidden passage at the back of the cabin that Bryce had mentioned earlier, a narrow tunnel that led to a small boat docked. At the riverbank, it was their only chance. Fisher was about to help Emma lower Bryce down into the tunnel when the door to the cabin slammed open. Fisher's heart stopped. "Get down!" Emma cried, but it was too late. The men had found them. Fisher spun around, his body instinctively going into a defensive stance. But before he could react, the figure in the doorway stepped forward. It was Marcus, the same man who had ordered Edward's death, the same man who had been hunting them ever since. "Thought you could run, did you?" Marcus said with a cruel smile. "You think hiding in the woods will save you?" Fisher's chest tightened. His pulse quickened. There was no way out. Not anymore. "Get out of here, Marcus," Fisher growled. "This isn't your fight." But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder and two other figures appeared in the doorway. Two more men, both carrying heavy weapons. Fisher knew this was the end. Emma's voice was a whisper, but it was filled with resolve. "We're not giving up, not now." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "You think you're in control here? You're outmatched." Fisher's eyes locked onto Bryce's face, where the older man was still lying, barely holding on. A fire ignited inside him. He couldn't let this be the end. Not like this. Not when they were so close. With a quick glance at Emma, Fisher took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm done running." Marcus's eyes flickered with amusement, but there was something else there, something Fisher couldn't quite place. "You really think you're going to stop me?" he asked. Fisher nodded. "I'm not alone." Before Marcus could react, Emma bolted forward, pushing a nearby table in his direction. It was a move of desperation, but it caught Marcus off guard. The table crashed into him, knocking him backward, but he quickly regained his footing, raising his weapon. "You'll regret this," Marcus spat, his voice thick with anger. In that moment, Fisher acted. He lunged forward, grabbing a nearby rusted crowbar and swinging it with everything he had. The blow connected with Marcus's shoulder, sending him stumbling back. But it wasn't enough. The man was too strong, too determined. But Fisher didn't. Stop, he couldn't. He grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her toward the back passage. "We're not finished yet," Fisher shouted. "Come on, we need to go." With a final glance at Bryce, his face pale and unmoving, Fisher turned and ran, dragging Emma with him. The sounds of the men's pursuit followed them, their angry voices filling the air, but they kept running. And as they disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, Fisher couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time and options. The darkness of the tunnel enveloped them, but Fisher didn't pause. He couldn't afford to. Each step, each sound that echoed in the hollow passageway, felt like it could be their last. The pressure in his chest grew heavier with every breath, every moment that passed without Bryce by their side. They had left him behind, too weak, too frail to carry. And as much as Fisher tried to ignore it, a gnawing sense of guilt tore at him. Emma, too, was silent as they moved quickly through the narrow space, her steps hurried, her face pale from fear and exhaustion. Her eyes were glued to the darkness ahead, but Fisher knew she was thinking the same thing he was. What happens next? The tunnel wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity before they reached the riverbank. A small rowboat bobbed gently in the water, tethered to a rotting dock. It wasn't much, barely enough to hold them both in their gear. But it was all they had. Fisher helped Emma into the boat, his hands trembling as he untied the rope. The air was thick with tension, the sound of the water lapping against the wood the only noise that kept them from complete silence. They hadn't even left the dock yet when Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep running like this, Fisher. We need to do something." He didn't look at her. His focus was on the water, on getting them as far from the cabin as possible. The men would be searching for them, combing the woods for any sign of where they'd gone. He knew they were unlikely to get far before they were found. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice strained. "Do you have a plan?" Emma looked down at her hands. "I don't know, but Bryce, he wanted us to survive. We can't just run forever. We need to fight back." Fisher's heart sank. He'd always known that. Survival meant more than running, but he'd been too scared to confront it, too scared to believe they could actually stand up to Marcus and his men. Now, with Bryce on the edge of death and the weight of the promise Fisher had made, he realized Emma was right. Fisher pulled the oars, pushing the boat further into the river. His arms burned with each stroke, but it was nothing compared to the weight on his soul. They had to find a way to fight back. They had to. After a few minutes of silence, Emma broke it again, this time with a quiet urgency. "We need allies. We can't do this alone." Fisher nodded, the harsh reality settling in. "Where do we even start?" he asked. Emma turned to look at him, her eyes filled with something new, determination. "I know people. People who owe me favors. People who've crossed paths with Marcus before. If we can find them, maybe we can turn this around." Fisher wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion or the desperation that made him believe her, but something in her voice, something in the way she said it, sparked a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe they weren't completely alone in this after all. They rowed in silence for a while, the boat cutting through the calm river. The trees on the opposite bank loomed like dark sentinels, the shadows growing longer as the night deepened. But the boat's movement was steady, and for the first time in days, Fisher felt like they had a chance to breathe. As the boat reached the far bank, Fisher could see the dim outline of a house in the distance. It was a small cabin, isolated, tucked away in a small clearing. It was the perfect place to regroup, to plan. "We'll head there," Fisher said, his voice steady now. "We can't stay in the boat. It's too exposed." Emma nodded. "There. Might be a way to signal the people I know, a flare, something. But we need to be careful. If Marcus is after us, there's no telling how many people he's got looking." The boat scraped against the shore, and Fisher helped Emma out first before pulling their meager supplies onto the bank. They didn't have much, just a few weapons, small medical kit, and whatever provisions they had managed to scrounge up before fleeing. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough. They moved through the woods cautiously, Fisher leading the way with Emma following closely behind. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunching of leaves beneath their feet. The tension was thick, as if the very air around them knew that something big was about to happen. The cabin they had seen from the river was just ahead. They could see the soft glow of a fire flickering through the windows, casting shadows against the walls. Fisher's heart raced. This was it. He turned to Emma. "Stay close and don't make a sound." As they neared the cabin, they could hear voices inside. Low, murmured conversation. Fisher motioned for Emma to wait while he crept up to the window. He peered inside, trying to make out who was there. It was a man, old, grizzled, with a thick beard, and a woman. Fisher didn't recognize them, but he knew they had to be important. He could feel it in the air. Emma joined him at the window, her face tense. "Do you think they're the ones I'm looking for?" she whispered. "Don't know," Fisher replied, "but we'll find out." He hesitated for a moment before stepping back from the window. They had to make their move. Fisher knocked 3 times, quick, sharp taps that cut through the silence like a signal. The door creaked open almost immediately. The man who answered was tall, rugged, with a scar running across his cheek. His eyes narrowed as he looked at them. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough and cautious. Fisher didn't hesitate. "We're here because we need help. We're running from Marcus." The man's eyes flickered with recognition, but he said nothing at first. He looked past them, scanning the dark woods. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "Come in." The door creaked shut behind them, sealing them off from the cold night air and whatever dangers lurked beyond the woods. "Messieurs." Heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. The man who had let them in, rough as he seemed, wasn't the one they had to fear right now. Marcus was the real danger, and the clock was ticking. The cabin smelled of wood and smoke, its interior dimly lit by the flickering flames in a stone fireplace. The woman who had been sitting near the fire rose when they entered, her eyes scanning them both before landing on Emma. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with hair tied back in a simple bun and a stern yet kindly face. Fisher saw the flash of recognition in her eyes when she looked at Emma. "You're Emma Carter, aren't you?" the woman asked quietly, her voice soft but steady. Emma nodded, a faint blush creeping up her neck. "Yes, I'm Emma, and this is Fisher. We need your help. We're being hunted by Marcus." The woman's expression didn't change, but Fisher saw her grip tighten on the wooden chair she was holding. The man with the scar was still standing near the door, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. He hadn't said a word, but Fisher could tell he was already preparing for something. "We've heard rumors," the woman said slowly, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. "About Marcus, about his empire, his connections. I didn't think it would come to this." Fisher didn't understand. "What rumors?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the surge of tension in his chest. The woman sighed, setting her mug of tea down on the table. "There's been talk, whispers of what he's doing in the shadows, his plans, his intentions, but no one ever thought anyone would survive it, let alone someone who could fight back. Emma, your father's name is cursed around here." Emma flinched at the mention of her father, but the woman's words didn't stop. "Marcus isn't just a man who controls business or land. He's far deeper into corruption than anyone realizes. It's not just money or power for him. He wants something else, something darker," she continued, the flickering firelight casting strange shadows over her face. Fisher stepped forward. "What does he want?" The woman hesitated. She exchanged a long glance with the scarred man, who remained silent but nodded slightly. Finally she spoke, her voice heavy with regret. "He's after something much older than you both realize. Something hidden in plain sight. Something your father was too involved with. The Carter family, Emma. Your father was trying to stop something, but he failed. And Marcus is using you to finish what your father started." Emma's face paled. "My father? What are you saying? He never told me any of this." The man with the scar finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "Your father was involved in something dangerous. Too dangerous. He tried to keep it from you, but it's not something you can escape now. Marcus knows that. And he's using you, Emma, as a pawn in whatever dark game he's playing. Fisher's mind raced, trying to piece the fragments of information together. He knew Emma's father had been a powerful man, influential and respected. But this was something entirely different. And if Marcus was after something more than just power, then they were all in deeper than they could imagine. Wait, Fisher said, stepping back. What exactly is Marcus after? And how does this involve Emma? What's hidden? The woman glanced at the scarred man again, and this time he nodded. She took a deep breath before continuing. Your father wasn't just wealthy. He was a keeper, one of a few, of something. A legacy, if you will. A very old artifact that Marcus believes will grant him the power he seeks. This artifact, she paused as though weighing her words carefully, it's more than a mere object. It has a history, a connection to ancient families, to bloodlines, to power that goes beyond wealth. And your father kept it hidden, Emma. He kept it from Marcus, and now Marcus is hunting you down for it. Emma's mouth went dry, her hand gripping the edge of the table for support. No, I don't understand. What artifact? I never knew any of this. My father never mentioned anything like that. The scarred man stepped forward now, his tone firm and unyielding. Your father was a protector, Emma. A protector of ancient knowledge that Marcus wants to control, and now Marcus thinks you hold the key to unlocking it. Fisher shook his head, trying to process the words. His chest felt tight, as though the very air in the cabin was thickening around him. You're saying she has something her father hid, and Marcus is going to do whatever it takes to get it? The woman nodded gravely. Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. The room fell silent for a moment. The crackling, fire the only sound. Emma's mind spun, trying to grasp the enormity of what she had just been told. For years she had believed her father's life was a simple story of business and wealth. But now it was clear that there had been so much more at play, and Marcus was willing to kill for it. Fisher stepped closer to Emma, trying to offer her some semblance of reassurance, but it was impossible to ignore the growing danger that hung over them both. What do we do? Fisher asked, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the woman. How do we stop him? The woman exhaled slowly, her face filled with a mixture of fear and determination. We don't have much time. Marcus knows you're alive, Emma. He'll be here soon with everything he has. We need to move fast, gather what we can, and prepare. The people I know, they might be able to help, but they need to understand what's at stake. The scarred man moved to the window and peered outside, scanning the woods. He muttered something under his breath, and then he turned to them. Get ready. Marcus won't wait. He never does. The door creaked shut behind them with a heavy thud, the muffled sounds of the forest fading into the background. Fisher's eyes adjusted to the dim light inside the cabin, his pulse quickening with the knowledge that they were no longer on the run. They were inside, safe, for now. But it was hard to shake the feeling that this place, like every other stop they'd made, might not be enough to protect them for long. The man who had opened the door motioned for them to sit. The woman, still silent, was seated by the fire, her back to them as she stirred a pot on the stove. There was a weight to the air here, something heavy and full of untold stories. Fisher could sense it, as could Emma. They exchanged a brief glance, one that spoke volumes of the uncertainty that still loomed over them. The man crossed the room and sat down across from them, his face hard, eyes sharp, scanning them both. Carefully. You said you're running from Marcus, he grunted, his voice low and gravelly. What's your connection to him? Fisher took a deep breath, the weight of the question pulling at him. He could lie, but the truth would be less messy. We were involved with him. He's not the man we thought he was. We're in danger. My brother's dead and he's got people looking for us. The man's brow furrowed, but there was something in his gaze that softened just a fraction. Your brother? Dead? He looked down, his hand rubbing his chin thoughtfully. I knew a man named Bryce, a fisherman. Tall, dark eyes. He's the one they're blaming for all this, isn't he? Fisher stiffened, his breath caught in his throat. How did this man know about Bryce? But he forced himself to remain calm, not wanting to reveal too much too quickly. You know him? Fisher asked, voice tight. The man nodded. I've heard the name before. Bryce was supposed to be in the clear, but something changed. Marcus came after him hard, killed him for what he found. He paused, his gaze flicking to Emma. And now you're running with the kid, huh? His sister? Emma clenched her jaw, her eyes burning with a mix of grief and fury. I'm his daughter, and I won't let Marcus get away with this. The woman who had been quietly watching from the fire finally spoke. You're not the first people he's betrayed, Marcus. He's a parasite. He won't stop until he has everything. He wants. Her voice was steady, but there was a cold edge to it, one that spoke of personal history. Fisher's curiosity spiked, but he didn't dare push just yet. He needed to focus. They needed help. The man who had opened the door, still eyeing them both with suspicion, leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. I've been in this fight longer than you. I've seen how it works. Marcus plays dirty, and he's not afraid to hurt anyone, no matter who they are. But you're gonna need more than a few guns and some luck to take him down. You need a plan. Fisher exchanged a quick glance with Emma. They hadn't come this far to back down now. We need to find his weak spot, Fisher said, his voice firm. That's the only way we're going to stop him. The man nodded slowly, his face unreadable. You might want to start with his finances, he said, his eyes narrowing. Marcus hides behind money. He's got a lot of connections, and not all of them are clean. Finances, Fisher repeated, trying to make sense of it. How does that help us? Follow the money, the man said, his voice taking on a serious tone. Marcus built his empire on dirty deals. If you find out where his money is, now it was clear that there had been so much more at play, and Marcus was willing to kill for it. Fisher stepped closer to Emma, trying to offer her some semblance of reassurance, but it was impossible to ignore the growing danger that hung over them both. What do we do? Fisher asked, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the woman. How do we stop him? The woman exhaled slowly, her face filled with a mixture of fear and determination. We don't have much time. Marcus knows you're alive, Emma. He'll be here soon with everything he has. We need to move fast, gather what we can, and prepare. The people I know, they might be able to help, but they need to understand what's at stake. The scarred man moved to the window and peered outside, scanning the woods. He muttered something under his breath, and then he turned to them. Get ready. Marcus won't wait. He never does. The door creaked shut behind them with a heavy Iliud, the muffled sounds of the forest fading into the background. Fisher's eyes adjusted to the dim light inside the cabin, his pulse quickening with the knowledge that they were no longer on the run. They were inside, safe for now. But it was hard to shake the feeling that this place, like every other stop they'd made, might not be enough to protect them for long. The man who had opened the door motioned for them to sit. The woman, still silent, was seated by the fire, her back to them as she stirred a pot on the stove. There was a weight to the air here, something heavy and full of untold stories. Fisher could sense it, as could Emma. They exchanged a brief glance, one that spoke volumes of the uncertainty that still loomed over them. The man crossed the room and sat down across from them, his face hard, eyes sharp, scanning them both. Carefully, you said you're running from Marcus, he grunted, his voice low and gravelly. What's your connection to him? Fisher took a deep breath, the weight of the question pulling at him. He could lie, but the truth would be less messy. We were involved with him. He's not the man we thought he was. We're in danger. My brother's dead and he's got people looking for us. The man's brow furrowed, but there was something in his gaze that softened just a fraction. Your brother. Dead? He looked down, his hand rubbing his chin thoughtfully. I knew a man named Bryce, a fisherman, tall, dark eyes. He's the one they're blaming for all this, isn't he? Fisher stiffened, his breath caught in his throat. How did this man know about Bryce? But he forced himself to remain calm, not wanting to reveal too much too quickly. You know him? Fisher asked, voice tight. The man nodded. I've heard the name before. Bryce was supposed to be in the clear, but something changed. Marcus came after him hard, killed him for what he found. He paused, his gaze flicking to Emma. And now you're running with the kid, huh? His sister? Emma clenched her jaw, her eyes burning with a mix of grief and fury. I'm his daughter, and I won't let Marcus get away with this. The woman, who had been quietly watching from the fire, finally spoke. You're not the first people he's betrayed. Marcus, he's a parasite. He won't stop until he has everything. He wants. Her voice was steady, but there was a cold edge to it, one that spoke of personal history. Fisher's curiosity spiked, but he didn't dare push just yet. He needed to focus. They needed help. The man who had opened the door, still eyeing them both with suspicion, leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. I've been in this fight longer than you. I've seen how it works. Marcus plays dirty, and he's not afraid to hurt anyone, no matter who they are. But you're gonna need more than a few guns and some luck to take him down. You need a plan. You'll find out how he's been controlling everything, and you'll find the leverage you need to take him down. Fisher's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about ending it. For good. Emma shifted beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she looked down at the floor. And what about the people he's hurting? What happens to them after we're done? The woman by the fire stood up suddenly, her movements swift and sharp. We deal with them later. First, you need to survive long enough to make your move. Fisher wasn't sure what it was. Fisher exchanged a quick glance with Emma. They hadn't come this far to back down now. We need to find his weak spot, Fisher said, his voice firm. That's the only way we're going to stop him. The man nodded slowly, his face unreadable. You might want to start with his finances, he said, his eyes narrowing. Marcus hides behind money. He's got a lot of connections, and not all of them are clean. Finances? Fisher repeated, trying to make sense of it. How does that help? Us? Follow the money, the man said, his voice taking on a serious tone. Marcus built his empire on dirty deals. If you find out where his money is. But the map had led them here for a reason. They were on the verge of something huge, something that could bring Marcus down, once and for all. They reached the front door, which was slightly ajar. Fisher hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. The creaking of the door seemed to echo for miles, but still, there was no movement inside. Stay sharp, Fisher whispered again, stepping into the dark interior. The air smelled stale, musty, as if the house had been left untouched for years. The entryway was grand, with marble floors that were cracked and worn. Paint peeled from the walls and dust danced in the dim light that filtered through the broken windows. It was a place that once knew power, but now it was a hollow reminder of a man's greed. They moved through the house cautiously, each step measured. Fisher's senses were on high alert, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Every shadow seemed to hide something sinister, every corner a potential threat. They reached the staircase. Fisher's fingers tightened around the banister, his breath coming shallow as he motioned for Emma to follow. He didn't know what he was expecting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. And then the silence shattered. A loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by rapid footsteps. Fisher's heart skipped a beat as he grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her behind a column, hiding in the shadows. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, silhouetted in the dim light. Fisher's blood ran cold as recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. It was Marcus. Well, well, Marcus said, his voice dripping with mock amusement. I was wondering when you two would show up. Fisher's grip on the gun tightened, but he didn't move. He knew they were outmatched. Marcus had years of experience on them, and he had everything to lose. You've been a thorn in my side for far too long, Marcus continued, stepping down the stairs slowly, almost leisurely. But you're too late. You won't get anything from here. You never were going to. Fisher clenched his jaw. You're wrong, Marcus. This ends today. Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and cold. Oh, is that so? You think you can just waltz in here and stop me? You've been following my breadcrumbs, haven't you? But now you've stumbled into the lion's den." Emma shifted beside him, her eyes full of resolve. "We're not leaving without answers." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Answers? What answers do you need? You've already figured out most of it, haven't you? You know I killed Bryce. You know I've been pulling the strings behind every move you've made. You're already too deep." The air between them thickened, charged with tension. Fisher could feel it, the inevitable collision that was about to happen. There was no turning back now. Not for him. Not for Emma. Suddenly Marcus's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of cold fury. "But you," he spat, pointing at Emma, "you were the final piece of the puzzle. You should have stayed hidden, kept your mouth shut. Now, you'll both die here." The finality in Marcus's words hung heavy in the air. Fisher's mind raced. He needed a plan, but there was no time to think. It was now or never. Emma, however, wasn't waiting for him. She stepped forward, her voice steady, unshaken. "You'll have to kill me first, Marcus." Marcus stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing in disbelief, but Fisher knew that was the opening they needed. Before Marcus could react, Fisher lunged forward, firing a single shot that struck him in the shoulder. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, but the chaos was just beginning. Marcus stumbled back, howling in pain, his hand clutching his bleeding shoulder. Fisher moved quickly, pulling Emma behind him as they took cover. But Marcus wasn't done. He was far from it. The fight had just begun. The house was alive with noise now, a frantic energy that matched the pounding in Fisher's chest. His breath came in short bursts, the adrenaline coursing through him. Every muscle tense, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving. Marcus, clutching his bleeding shoulder, glared at them, eyes burning with rage. His smirk had faltered, but it was quickly replaced by something far more dangerous, a cold determination. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Marcus sneered, his voice low and venomous. "You think a bullet can stop me?" Fisher's finger tightened on the trigger. Again, but Emma's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Don't," she whispered urgently, her eyes wide with something like realization. "This isn't over. He's got more power than we think." Fisher hesitated, unsure if it was a moment of wisdom or fear in her voice. Marcus was dangerous, that much was certain. But something about Emma's tone made him pause, her fear not of the man but of the situation itself. Was there something more to this? Was there a trap waiting to snap shut around them? "Listen to her, Fisher," Marcus mocked, a twisted smile curling at the corner of his lips. "You think you're the hero in this story? But you're just a pawn, just like everyone else." Emma stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "What's your endgame, Marcus?" The question hung in the air, too heavy to ignore. Marcus laughed, a dark, hollow sound. "You're asking the wrong question, sweetheart," he said, taking a few slow, deliberate steps toward them. "The question you should be asking is, who's pulling the strings behind me?" Fisher's mind raced. "What are you talking about?" Marcus's grin grew wider, as if savoring the confusion he was sowing. "You think it was just me, don't you? You think I'm the one who orchestrated it all? Bryce's death, the lies, the manipulation? I was just a tool. A tool for someone far more powerful than you can imagine." The words hit like a slap to the face. Fisher's stomach dropped, a pit opening wide as he processed what Marcus was saying. It couldn't be. Who else could have been behind this? Emma's hand tightened around the grip of her gun, but she didn't raise it. "You're lying. There's no one else." But Marcus shook his head. "Oh, sweetheart, you have no idea how deep this goes." He lifted his hand to his own throat, and Fisher noticed something strange. There, just beneath the skin, a faint glow emanated from under his clothes. It was subtle at first, but it grew brighter as Marcus spoke. "Who do you think funded everything?" Marcus's voice dropped, taking on a hushed, almost reverential tone. "The real question isn't who's running this operation. It's who created it. Who's got their hands so far in this that even I don't know their full reach." Fisher's head spun. His thoughts were a blur, He reached out instinctively to grab Emma's arm, but before he could, Marcus's voice hit them like a sudden storm. "Your dear little brother, Fisher. He didn't just stumble into that water. He was chosen." The world around Fisher blurred as everything came crashing together. Bryce's death, the lies, the betrayal. It was like a puzzle with too many pieces, and now one piece had shifted. "To place," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "You didn't know, did you, Fisher? You think you're the only one with a hidden past, but you're wrong. Your brother was part of the plan, just like you were. And now, Emma, she's the final piece." Emma stepped back, shaking her head. "You're insane. This is all a game to you." "Oh no, sweetheart," Marcus sneered. "It's not a game. It's a new world. You just don't know it yet." Fisher's mind raced to keep up with the onslaught of information. "What do you mean? What's the connection?" For a moment, Marcus was quiet, his eyes narrowing. "Don't you get it? You're the bait, Fisher, you and Emma both. All the pieces were laid out long before you even knew there was a game to play." The room seemed to close in around them, the walls themselves leaning in with the weight of Marcus's words. Fisher felt his world fracture. "No," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, you're lying. Bryce wasn't. He wasn't part of your plan." Marcus tilted his head, his smirk growing. "Bryce's death wasn't an accident. He was supposed to be part of the experiment. He was supposed to become the key." The words sent a chill through Fisher's bones. He turned to Emma, his voice hoarse. "Emma, what's he talking about? What is he saying?" But Emma was still staring at Marcus, as if everything had suddenly clicked into place. "Why?" Fisher's voice was frantic now, the panic creeping in. Why would anyone want Bryce?" Marcus's answer was cold and clinical, as though recounting some twisted history. "Because your brother was part of a program, an experiment that was designed to test human limits. Bryce was supposed to be one of the first to survive, but he failed. The experiment failed. And that's why he had to die." The air was thick with the weight of his words. Fisher felt his legs weaken, but he steadied himself, unwilling to show Marcus even a hint of defeat. "And you? You're next, Fisher," Marcus added, his voice turning sharper. "You all are. The plan is moving forward, and it's too late to stop it now." It was too much. Fisher couldn't breathe. He wasn't sure what was real anymore, or what was a lie. Emma's voice was like a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge. "There's someone else, isn't there? Someone bigger than you." Marcus's eyes glittered with a dangerous glint. But he didn't answer. Instead, he let out a short, triumphant laugh, and then he did the unthinkable. With a sudden, fluid motion, Marcus reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a device. A small button, its surface glinting in the dim light. Fisher's heart stopped. "You're too late," Marcus whispered. Fisher's blood ran cold. The device in Marcus's hand gleamed ominously, the small button no larger than a coin, but its significance was monumental. The last few minutes felt as if they were in slow motion, time stretching impossibly thin. His mind scrambled for answers, but all he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his ears. "Don't." Fisher's voice cracked as he stepped forward, instinctively reaching for his gun. His fingers trembled, but the weapon still felt foreign in his hands. He had been too slow before. What if he was too slow now? Marcus's grin deepened, the cruel satisfaction in his eyes only intensifying. "Too late, Fisher. It's already been set into motion. All the pieces are in place." "Stop. What are you doing?" Emma cried, her voice strained, almost desperate. She moved between Fisher and Marcus, trying to close the distance, but Marcus simply raised his hand, signaling her to stop. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," Marcus sneered. "It's the others." Fisher's mind raced. "Who are you working for?" His eyes flicked back to Emma, then to the device in Marcus's hand, trying to make sense of it. "What is that thing?" Marcus tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly as he examined them. "You're both so caught up in your little game. You really think you're in control here? That you can stop it all? Let me give you a reality check, Fisher. You've been played from the beginning. From the moment you set foot in that damn river, you were already marked." Emma stepped forward again, her expression turning steely. "If you think we're going to let you get away with this, you're wrong. We'll stop you." The tension in the room thickened. The weight of the moment hung heavy like an impending storm, the air charged with a sense of finality. Fisher tightened his grip on his gun, but Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled softly, as if this whole situation was beneath him. "I'm not the one you're stopping," Marcus replied, his voice smooth, almost amused. "You've always been one step behind. You're not the players in this game, Fisher. You're the pawns." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Fisher's grip tightened on the weapon, and his mind raced. Was Marcus telling the truth? Were they still being played? Were they never in control? The question gnawed at him, 1,000 what-ifs clawing at his mind. Emma, however, wasn't backing down. "Who's behind all this, Marcus?" she asked, her voice sharp with resolve. "We know you're not the mastermind, you're just a tool. So who's pulling your strings?" For a brief moment, Marcus's expression flickered, something like hesitation crossing his face before it was masked by a sneer. He looked over at Emma, his gaze darkening. "You still don't get it, do you?" He spat, his words dripping with venom. "The ones pulling the strings aren't just in charge of this city or this country. They control everything. Your lives, your families, your futures. And soon, everything you thought you knew will be gone." Fisher's pulse quickened, the weight of Marcus's words settling like a stone in his chest. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "Everything is connected," Marcus said, his voice lowering. "Your brother, the so-called accident, Bryce's death, it was all part of the same plan. You think you're the only one who's lost someone? You think you're the only one who's been hurt by this?" Fisher's mind reeled, the pieces falling into place. They had been orchestrating everything. From the very beginning, the people he had trusted, the people he thought were safe, had been playing a role in a game much larger than he could have imagined, and Bryce, his brother, had been central to it all. "Bryce wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time," Marcus continued, his voice almost casual now, as if telling Fisher a bedtime story. "He was part of the experiment, the test, just like you were, and just like Emma will be." Fisher's hand tightened on the gun again, his thoughts racing faster now. He wasn't sure if he should pull the trigger or if he should force Marcus to explain more. "What test?" Emma's voice shook slightly as she spoke, but there was no fear in it, only determination. "What are you talking about? What experiment?" Marcus's grin returned, slow and deliberate. "A project. A program. You think you were born into your lives by chance, that everything that's happened to you is random? You're wrong. You were chosen. You were selected." Fisher felt his breath catch in his throat. The idea, the sheer impossibility of what Marcus was saying, made his head spin. He had always believed that the events of his life were products of his choices, his actions. But Marcus was telling him something different. It was as if they had been puppets, strings pulled by invisible hands. "Chosen for what?" Emma demanded, taking another step forward. "Tell me the truth." Marcus's gaze turned cold. "You'll find out soon enough," he said darkly. "But right now, you should be more worried about what happens next." He turned the device over in his hand, and Fisher felt his blood run cold. He was about to do something catastrophic, something that would change everything. Fisher's instincts screamed at him to act. He had to stop Marcus, had to stop whatever was coming next. But before he could move, Marcus pressed the button. For a split second, everything went silent. It was as if the entire world held its breath, waiting for the inevitable to arrive. Then in the distance there was a faint sound, a low hum that began to build, growing louder and louder, until it seemed to shake the very air around them. Fisher's heart stopped. "What the hell is that?" Emma asked, her voice sharp with alarm. She stepped back, glancing nervously around the room, as if searching for the source of the noise. Marcus's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "That, my dear, is the sound of everything falling apart." And just like that, the room was plunged into darkness. Fisher's heart raced as he fumbled for his flashlight, the metallic taste of fear filling his mouth. The humming sound that Marcus had triggered grew louder, now vibrating the walls of the room. The air felt thick as if it were pressing down on him, constricting his every breath. "Fisher, where are you?" Emma's voice cracked through the darkness, filled with panic. "I'm here," Fisher shouted, reaching out blindly, his fingers brushing the cold, damp walls as he tried to regain his bearings. His mind raced. Whatever Marcus had done, it was far worse than he could have imagined. The sound, the intensity of it. It was like nothing he'd ever encountered. Something was coming. Something terrible. "Marcus!" Emma called out, her voice trembling. "What have you done? What is this?" The darkness seemed to stretch forever, and in the pit of Fisher's stomach, a gnawing dread settled. The flash of Marcus's smug grin was burned into his memory. He had set something in motion, something that would unravel everything. "Marcus!" Fisher shouted again, his voice hoarse as his hand found the cold steel of the doorframe. He pulled himself to his feet, ignoring the tremor in his legs, his mind consumed with fear for Emma. The humming grew louder, the noise now reverberating through the very foundation of the building. Fisher could feel it in his chest, the deep, pulsing beat of whatever machine Marcus had triggered. Suddenly, a flicker of light broke through the darkness, a weak, flickering beam from the flashlight Emma had managed to grab. Fisher rushed toward the light, stumbling over debris as he closed the distance. "What the hell is that noise?" Emma's voice was edged with panic, her flashlight flickering uncertainly as she scanned the room. "I don't know," Fisher replied, his voice strained. "But we need to stop whatever Marcus just did." The hum was now joined by a low, mechanical whirring sound, followed by a strange clicking. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, vibrating with the pressure of some unseen force. "Where is he?" Emma asked, her voice small, almost as if she were asking for reassurance. Fisher's eyes darted around, still trying to piece together the puzzle. His mind was reeling. Marcus had said something about an experiment, about being chosen. What did it all mean? What had they gotten themselves into? "He's gone," Fisher muttered, his voice distant. "But whatever he did, we need to stop it." Suddenly the building shook, the sound of metal grinding against metal, a deep mechanical groan that felt as if it were coming from the very bowels of the earth. Fisher grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her closer to him as the shaking intensified. "This whole place is coming apart," Fisher said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to get out of here now." But Emma refused to move. Her eyes were wide, her face pale with terror, but there was something else there, a determination, an unwavering focus. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "We don't know what's happening, Fisher. We have to find Marcus. We have to stop whatever he triggered." "Emma, please," Fisher began, but she shook her head, cutting him off. "We don't have time," she insisted. "We need to find out what's happening and stop it. I'm not running away again." Her words hit Fisher like a slap. She was right. They couldn't just leave. This had gone too far. Too much was at stake. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "All right, we find Marcus. We end this." As they moved deeper into the darkness, the air grew colder, the tremors more violent. Fisher's flashlight flickered, casting long shadows against the walls, but the further they went, the more everything seemed to distort. The floor seemed to buckle beneath their feet. The walls were no longer straight, as if they were bending, warping, and twisting in impossible ways. It felt like the entire building was alive, breathing and shifting beneath their steps. Then, through the chaos, a voice echoed out from the shadows, a voice Fisher recognized. "Fisher. Emma. I'm so glad you could join me." Fisher froze. It was Marcus. "Marcus," Fisher called out, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and dread. "What the hell have you done?" From the shadows, Marcus stepped into the weak light. His face was pale, his eyes wild with excitement. He looked almost unhinged, as if something in him had snapped. He didn't carry the device anymore. Instead, he held something different, something that glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. "I've done what I had to," Marcus said, his voice low, almost reverent. What you don't understand, Fisher, is that none of this was ever about you or me. It's about the future, the real future. Fisher's stomach churned as the light flickered ominously in Marcus's hands. What future? Fisher demanded. Tell me what this is. Marcus's smile spread wider. You're still so blind. The world you know, the system, it's falling apart. I'm not the one who made that happen, Fisher. It's been in motion for years. I just sped things up. Fisher's thoughts collided in a swirl of confusion. What do you mean? What is that thing? What did you trigger? Marcus held the glowing object in his hands, rotating it slowly. The light seemed to pulse in rhythm. With the humming noise in the background, the sound now more of a low, steady growl. This, Marcus said softly, is the beginning of the end. And you, Fisher, you've just become part of it. Emma stepped forward. Tell us what you've done, she shouted. Tell us what you're trying to start. Marcus's eyes glinted with something cruel, a twisted pleasure. I'm starting. The revolution, Emma. The revolution that's been set into motion for decades. This, he gestured to the object in his hands, is the key to unlocking everything. The control, the power, the system. It all ends now. Fisher's blood ran, cold as he realized what Marcus was implying. Whatever Marcus had in his hands, it was far worse than he had imagined. It wasn't just an experiment. It wasn't just a tool for chaos. It was the beginning of something, much darker, and they were running out of time. The glowing object in Marcus's hands pulsed with an eerie light, its rhythmic pulse matching the trembling of the building around them. Fisher could feel the air grow heavier, each breath more difficult to take. The humming noise reverberated in his bones, the world around him seeming to collapse inward, closing in on him. Emma's hand shot out, her fingers trembling as she pointed at the device. What is that thing? What does it do? Marcus's smile widened, a dark glint in his eyes. It's more than just a machine. It's a catalyst, a key to unlock the system, the one that's kept us all shackled. You see, the world's been built on lies, on control, and it's time for that to end. Fisher stepped forward, his pulse racing. Stop, Marcus. You're talking like you've lost your mind. What are you trying to do? What's your real goal here? Marcus's eyes flickered with a strange emotion, something between grief and glee. The truth, Fisher. I'm giving everyone the truth. I'm ending the lies, ending the system. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. But you're using us, using all of us as pawns in some twisted game. This thing, it's not just going to change the system, it's going to destroy everything, isn't it? Marcus paused, his gaze shifting as if considering her words. You don't understand. I didn't want to destroy it. But destruction is inevitable. The system has already been crumbling and it won't stop until it's reduced to dust. Fisher's mind spun, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This is bigger than just us. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? This isn't just about power, it's about control. Marcus nodded, his expression strangely calm. Bow. Yes, it's about freedom, a new world order. The chains are broken. The revolution has begun. Fisher's chest tightened, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. Emma's fingers clenched at his side, her face pale with a mix of fear and disbelief. They were standing on the edge of a precipice and the fall felt inevitable. Do you even hear yourself? Fisher demanded, his voice shaking with anger. What you're doing is madness. You're trying to burn everything down, everything, just to rebuild. It in your image. But the people, they'll suffer. You're not a savior, Marcus, you're a tyrant. Marcus laughed, the sound cold and hollow. You don't get it, Fisher. This isn't about saving anyone. It's about breaking the chains. And the only way to break them is to let everything fall apart. Fisher's heart pounded in his chest. He knew what he had to do. The device in Marcus's hands wasn't just dangerous. It was catastrophic. Whatever Marcus had planned, it was too far gone to stop with words. There was only one way to stop him now. I won't let you do this, Fisher said, his voice low and steady. I'm taking that thing from you. Without another word, he lunged toward Marcus, his body driven by desperation. But Marcus was quicker than he expected, his hand swinging the device with surprising speed. A burst of light flared from it, a searing flash that sent Fisher stumbling backward, his vision blurring. "Stay back," Marcus shouted, his voice trembling with fury. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Fisher struggled to regain, his footing, the blinding light still swimming in his vision. He reached out for Emma, his hand finding hers in the chaos. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted. But before they could move, the entire room seemed to shake violently, the walls groaning as if they were about to collapse. The lights flickered and died, leaving them in total darkness. Then an explosion of sound, a deafening guttural roar that seemed to come from all directions. Fisher's heart raced as he gripped Emma's hand tighter, the ground beneath them, trembling like the world itself was being torn apart. Suddenly, a voice rang out, clear and unyielding. "No!" It was Marcus, his scream piercing the chaos. Fisher's pulse quickened as he strained to see through the blackness. Something was wrong. Something had gone terribly wrong. And then, as if the air itself was being sucked from the room, everything fell silent. The shaking stopped. The roaring ceased. For a moment there was nothing but stillness, complete and utter silence. Fisher held his breath. Was it over? Was Marcus? "Marcus," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible in the dead quiet. Fisher's eyes scanned the room, trying to adjust to the darkness, but all he could see were shifting shadows. And then, in the far corner, he saw a figure. It was Marcus, slumped against the wall, his face pale, his body motionless. "Marcus!" Fisher called out, his voice sharp with concern, but there was no response. Fisher rushed toward him, his heart pounding in his chest. "Marcus, can you hear me? Are you okay?" He knelt beside Marcus, his hand reaching for his neck, checking for a pulse. There was none. Emma's breath hitched as she crouched beside Fisher, her face a mask of disbelief. He's gone?" Fisher looked down at Marcus, his eyes narrowing. There was no sign of life, no breath, no movement. The machine, the one that had caused so much chaos, lay beside him, its eerie glow now dim and lifeless. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room felt suffocating, oppressive, but even as they stood over Marcus's body, a question lingered in the air. Was it truly over? Or had they just witnessed the calm before the storm? Fisher turned to Emma, his face hardening, with resolve. "We're not out of this yet." The room was still, but the weight of the past hour pressed heavily on Fisher and Emma. Marcus lay motionless against the wall, his plan for destruction snuffed out by the very thing he had sought to control. The device, now powerless, lay like a lifeless relic at his side. It was strange the way the world seemed to hold its breath. Fisher could still feel the hum of tension in the air, like the aftermath of a storm, when you don't know if the sky is truly clear or if it's just waiting for the next lightning strike. Emma's voice broke the silence first. "What now? What happens to all of this? To us?" Fisher stared at the lifeless form of Marcus for a long moment, his chest tight with emotion. What now? The question echoed in his mind. Had they truly won? Or was there more to the story than they could see? Marcus had created chaos, and in his death it felt like the chaos had only deepened, leaving a hole where an answer should be. "I don't know," Fisher said, his voice quiet. "But I do know one thing. We've been given a second chance. We've got to make sure Marcus's death wasn't in vain." Emma's eyes searched his face, as if trying to understand the depth of his words. "A second chance," she repeated softly. Fisher nodded, his gaze hardening with a quiet determination. "Yes, the world isn't perfect, it never will be. But we have a choice now. We can rebuild. We can change what was broken." Emma's lips trembled. "How? How do we change anything after all of this?" He didn't have a clear answer for her. Not yet. The idea of changing the system, of rebuilding what had been so deeply corrupted, seemed both impossible and essential. But somewhere in the weight of that responsibility, Fisher felt the stirrings of something, hope, maybe, or purpose. It was fragile, but it was real. Suddenly, a sound broke through their conversation, the soft rustling of paper. Fisher turned, his heart leaping in his chest as he saw the last thing he expected. On the floor beside Marcus's body, a small folder had slipped out from under the man's jacket. Fisher picked it up, the sense of foreboding thick in his throat. What was this? What had Marcus hidden? He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the contents, his brow furrowed as he recognized the familiar name. The project. Emma. Fisher began, his voice low and urgent. There's more to this than we thought. This wasn't just about power. This was about something else entirely. Emma moved toward him, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. What do you mean? What's in there? Fisher spread the papers across the ground, reading the words aloud, as he pieced together Marcus's final plan. Marcus wasn't just trying to break the system. He was trying to rebuild it. But not in the way we thought. This project is about creating a new world. One where the people, those like us, are in control. A world where the elite aren't at the top. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. He was going to change everything? Fisher nodded, his heart heavy with the realization. Yes, but it wasn't just about freedom. It was about creating a new hierarchy, his hierarchy. And for that, he needed us all to burn, to sacrifice everything for his vision. The weight of Marcus's true intentions hung over them like a shadow. It wasn't just about rebellion. It was about a twisted idea of salvation, one where, in the end, the world would be reborn from ashes, but under Marcus's rule, and the lives lost, innocent lives, would have been nothing more than collateral damage in his quest for control. A deep anger burned within Fisher's chest. He had seen how people like Marcus could manipulate others for their own gain, how they could convince themselves that their twisted view of the world was somehow justified. And yet, in the end, all it left behind was devastation. Emma was silent for a long moment, her face pale. So what do we do now? Fisher looked down at the papers, then back at her. We make sure this never happens again. The words were simple, but the resolve behind them was stronger than any plan Marcus had ever made. They couldn't let the darkness of Marcus's vision fester. They had to stop it now, before it spread any further. Fisher. Emma's voice was softer now, filled with a quiet vulnerability. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Fisher reached out, his hand closing around hers. You are. We're both stronger than we think, and we don't have to do this alone. They stood together in the silence, the weight of Marcus's death heavy between them, but also somehow the first glimmer of a future they could fight. For in that moment, Fisher realized that redemption wasn't just about saving the world. It was about saving themselves, finding peace in the aftermath, and doing whatever they could to prevent the mistakes of the past from repeating. The journey wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, Fisher believed that, maybe, just maybe, they could make things right. The world outside remained unchanged, but inside Fisher's heart, a new light was beginning to shine, one that would guide him through the darkness to a future where justice, not control, would reign. The door creaked open, and as Fisher and Emma stepped into the unknown, they knew that while they had fought for survival, they had also fought for something more. Hope. The end. Or perhaps the beginning.